How are we doing?
Hello.
Awesome. We're here
Hello,
today for the
hello.
Fireside Chat, obviously with Daniel Head. Before we dive in, I always like to start us off with a quick icebreaker. Since obviously today is Pie Day, I'm going to ask the question, what are your guys' favorite pies?
Pi Day. Oh,
Pete?
I forgot about that. We got Pi Day, we've got we got Star Wars Day coming up. May the 4th be with you, etc. I think my favorite pie. I don't know. I'm pretty boring. Kind of like an apple pie guy. Dan, what's your go-to?
Well, I was gonna. I mean, of course, apple pie with, in my case, cold custard, which is contentious in my family.
Ooh,
they think I'm deranged or something.
a heathen.
But no, I'm gonna go with cottage pie. Actually, savoury.
What's what's that?
Yeah,
That sounds like a British thing.
it's like beef mince and carrot with
Oh,
mashed potato on the top.
okay. All right.
Oh,
Maybe I
very
would
nice.
change and I'd come party with that. That sounds awesome. What about you, Elliot?
See, I keep it simple, just some pumpkin pie with a little whipped cream on top. Thanksgiving, favorite thing that I look forward to? Okay, let's
Lovely.
get this show on the road, guys. So
Hmm.
obviously today's event is brought to you by the team here at Modern Sales Pros. For everyone not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners that they may not know about. We do that through live sessions like this, an online forum, and our quarterly summits. If you're not already a part of the community, you're actually going to be invited to join after this event. Before we dive into the content, I want to cover some quick housekeeping notes. First of all, this event is being recorded. You're going to be able to access the recording and key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if there's any questions for our speakers today, please do use the Q&A function or the chat, and they're going to do their best to answer questions throughout the event. Otherwise, reach out afterwards. Okay, Pete, I'm going to hand things off over to you. Do some intros about Atrium and everybody. See you guys at the
One.
end.
Cool. Thanks, Elliot. I appreciate it. Hey, folks. My name is Pete Kazanji. We'll get into a little bit more intros here in a second, but this event is sponsored by Atrium. Atrium makes what we call data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales organizations align their go-to-market teams and embed a culture of data-driven sales management from top to bottom. And primarily, the way that Atrium does that is by helping frontline sales managers improve rep performance by using through the smart application of data. So that's kind of what we do here. I'm super pumped to have Dan here today. Dan, do you prefer Dan or Daniel? I can't remember. I'm trying to recall.
Yeah,
Both.
mother is the only one that calls me Dan.
Okay, cool. Then I'm calling you Dan because I'm
Do
from
that.
Southern California. So I'm super pumped to have Dan here today. Somebody that I've known for a hot second, although we've never had the opportunity to meet up live. We were introduced by one of my board members, Brett Queener, the first head of sales operations at Salesforce, oh so long ago. So Dan's part of the extended Salesforce mafia. But for folks who don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's really where I went from being like a business generalist founder um, to a sales like first seller, sales leader, or sorry, sales manager, sales leader, etc. Subsequent to that, ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then started this little sales leadership and operations community called Modern Sales Pros. So but you guys aren't here to hear from me. You're here to hear from Dan. So, Dan, maybe you can share with folks a little bit about what you spend your time on right now. I know we're going to get into, you know, the journey with Braze and kind of like before that with like Salesforce Marketing Cloud and Exact Target and so on and so forth. Like that'll kind of be the meat of our conversation. But just maybe just like really quickly, what your most recent kind of gigs were.
Yeah, so right now I'm in that very pleasant position of challenging myself to figure out what's next. And uh, it's a
Staycation, homecation.
well, kind of. I've definitely unapologetically rewarded myself with a bit of R&R over the last few months after
I
the
love it.
stint at Braze. I'm learning a lot in this period about the new world. I mean, like advisory is very different than having an operating role, and so I'm learning about advisory. I'm advising everything from other SaaS companies to actually a CPG electronics product. To and I've even sort of got a light touch point with a carbon fiber company. So I'm testing myself in lots of different ways, and I'm digesting the last nearly 3 decades in software that I've had and plotting the path forward. So this is a time of exploration, Pete.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's just really quickly let's give people a little bit of context on Braze before we kind of get into like, you know, the journey associated with it. So, you know, Braze, customer engagement platform, is that kind of like what that we call that category? Went public, was it last year or the year before? I'm trying to remember.
November 21.
November 21. Oh God, 2 years ago. Good timing. Good timing. That was we're gonna chalk that. That was Dan's idea. We're gonna chalk that up to Dan. But how big was Braze when public? How big was the sales organization? Maybe just give people a little bit of like parameters so they kind of understand exactly like the magnitude of like the ship that was being steered when it like went out of port, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a blur, these numbers. I think like most people, I tend to think in terms of like pre and post pandemic, you know, because that IPO November 21 was like 6 days after the US opened its borders and people were allowed to come in again. So that to me kind of marked the end. But I know that if I rack my brain, the whole company was 400 people pre-pandemic. So what's that? March 2020. Post-pandemic, it was more than twice that size. So it must have been like nearly 1,000 people. Revenue-wise, I'd have to go back through the S1 or remind myself of that. But it's got to be a couple of 100 million, just a bit more than that ARR.
Got it. And how big was the sales team?
The sales team by the time we IPO was probably knocking on 300.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. And was that all across the world?
Yeah, so that's global. And when I say sales org, I mean I'm not including other go-to-market functions like customer success. So that's literally sales, that's pre-sales, that's business development, some what we call kind of strategic value consulting or strategic consulting, and things like renewals, business development, and so on.
Okay, got it. So definitely not small. So I think one of the things that, and actually I think I neglected to cover something here really quickly. For folks who are joining us, if you're interested in, I'm sporting one of our Atrium Sales Nerd hoodies right now. If you are a sales nerd, like Dan is definitely a sales nerd, and you like to get one of these sales nerd hoodies, we're going to go ahead and drop a link here in the chat for folks to sign up for one of those to get one for free. So just go ahead and do that when you have a chance. So let's talk a little bit about Braze and kind of its journey. So I think like you had previously worked in customer engagement space with ExactTarget, right? Which was like the big dog within the Salesforce Marketing Cloud, right? And so then there was like subsequent to that, there were these new school customer engagement platforms, kind of like more modern versions of that. What was kind of like the biggest challenge, or like what were some of the biggest challenges associated with like selling in an existing category where there's existing providers like ExactTarget's, your prior employer, Responsys, I'm sure there's like a bajillion others as well. What were some of the biggest challenges, like getting these organizations comfortable with like a newer upstart like Braze, as you guys kind of went from smaller customers to medium customers to like very large customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big learning for me was that the persona that we were targeting was actually different. So if we'd gone after the same customers with Braze, which back then was called Appboy, we changed the name after like a year or so. But if we'd gone after the same customers, rarely resonated. So we were
Really?
talking to a different set of people and a different persona, and it took me a while to figure that out, actually, because having worked, I was at Salesforce when the Marketing Cloud was born. So Radian 6 was acquired, Buddy Media was acquired, ExactTarget was acquired. They smashed it together, called it Marketing Cloud. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, baking that cake, the product marketing cake. And of course, Adobe did the same, and IBM and SAP and Oracle did the same.
Right.
And I when I joined Braze, or AppBraze it was then, I thought, well, I know this market. I know customer journeys. I know journey automation. I know, like, you know, one-to-one customer 360, all that kind of thing. I get it.
Yep.
But when I joined, I couldn't figure out why in every customer meeting I sat in, I couldn't understand a word anybody was saying. And it took me a while to figure that out. But ultimately, I discovered that Braze, this new technology, it wasn't about the application so much as it was about the data architecture and the engineering. And rather than speaking just to marketers who didn't really care about the technology layer underneath, we were talking to marketing technologists, and we were talking to engineers and technology professionals who knew the difference between this set of engineering works to serve the purpose and the end goal, and this set doesn't. And so it was a much more technical discussion with a new generation of working professionals in marketing technology. And so what happened was we started off selling to the new tech disruptors, you know, like the dating apps, the on-demand travel apps, the games, and all that kind of thing.
Mid-market, you know, Deer, right? They can move fast. They're open to new things, etc.
And think completely differently. Yeah, like you know, the sorts of businesses that have just got disruptive business models, and they're starting with a blank sheet of paper and they're building their stacks from scratch. Yeah. And they're questioning everything, and they're really smart people, really smart technologists. And then what happened, of course, was over time, those people left those companies and went to join the likes of Disney and Walmart. And then, and of course, over time, then that's how our business then really opened up, or the Braze business opened up the enterprise. And eventually we started to win business from those legacy players.
That's interesting. So just to make sure I'm understanding, it sounds like, and I think this is how, like, when you think about durable new entrants into an existing category, it can't just be like shinier or whatever. Like, there has to be something that's like fundamentally different. And I guess actually, you know, maybe ExactTarget as compared to the legacy, like on-prem ones, is probably an example of that. So there needs to be some sort of durable difference. And then moreover, so then it's a question of like, who cares about that durable difference? And I think what I'm understanding here is, like, the kind of unique selling proposition of Braze was not like, hey, this is Braze, you can do like a customer journey and it's like way, you know, and it doesn't look as crappy as like the ExactTarget UI or the Responses UI or whatever, because that, like, the VP of marketing or the CMO or the marketing operations person was going to be like, I don't know, I'm so locked in over here. Like, do you know how many landing pages I have? Get out of here. Right. Whereas in this case, it was like very, very differentiated because like the data architecture was different. And so then that's like a key enabler that then, like, the data team at this company or whatever would really care about. And so it's almost like you're talking to those stakeholders who then would then convince the CMO, like, hey, this is actually the reason why it's worth abandoning all those landing pages that you guys, you know, migrating all those landing pages that you guys put so much time and effort into, because it's going to enable you to do this. And so that seems like that was a very different, like, sell. How did you guys, so you identified that, but then it sounds like you're almost talking to a different audience. How did you enable your reps in order to, like, talk engineering or talk more technically to the like those stakeholders?
Yeah, I guess, and I think you said something about, you know, how sexy the screens look or whatever. And I think, and that's kind of the red herring. Like, lots of products that aren't great have really nice UIs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can build a beautiful UI, and that doesn't necessarily mean that what's going on under the hood is fit for purpose. And
Right.
the analogy I was always use is, you might have two cakes and they look exactly the same, but the ingredients are different. Or, you know,
or
you
pies.
or you lift the hood on a Tesla and there's no combustion engine there, you know, but there's still a car. Yeah. And so I think one path is you you get these technologies that that approach an existing category in an entirely different modern way. And then, of course, you get some applications which create new categories. And this was approaching it in an entirely different way, which was necessary because the modern consumer was behaving in an entirely different way. And so the enablement challenge was really not so great, because we were hiring. Well, the challenge we have is that, when, as many people, I guess, on this that listen to this call will relate to, but if you're a startup, you're probably not hiring A-grade proven sales talent, and you've got to make it, and you've got to take risks.
Yeah,
and
we turn tin into bronze into gold. That's what we do, right?
You could get those awards in your annual ceremony, and the tin award. But these people we were hiring, they weren't experienced, but they were smart.
Yeah.
And so we just made sure we hired smart people, that we took the time to educate. We were all learning together, because these technologies and the architecture underneath was really very new. We were learning together. We were speaking to an audience that was also new and thinking about this in a different way. So we were learning from our audience, and very, very quickly it was pretty clear we've got something very different here in what looks like a similar category.
Which I think could be like really like dangerous, right? Especially when, like trying to run the same playbook like mindlessly can be really dangerous. It's like the best thing, the metaphor for that is like cargo cults, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm gonna get the I'm gonna get the planes to show up back to the World War II islands and deliver the the chocolate and the Coca-Cola by building planes out of coconuts and palm trees or whatever, like just slavishly following the same thing that worked at ExactTarget. And I think a lot of us could like maybe appreciate that. Like, I'll give you an example from our experience at Atrium, and also it can kind of change depending on how the market has changed. Like, typically with Atrium, we make what we call, data-driven sales management software, and the primary person like whose life it makes better is like the sales manager, the SDR manager, or what have you. It allows them to use more effectively use metrics to manage their team. But the thing is that like, we initially thought that like a sales motion was going to look like a Datadog sales motion, where like someone could like recognize their pain and then make a decision that they were going to buy this on their own, and then they were going to be happier as a clam, like as this SDR manager with their 8 SDRs or whatever, irrespective of what this SDR manager over here was doing or this. And then what we kind of realized as we talked with more and more folks like you and VPs of sales, especially in like larger organizations, is that like that's okay, but it's actually not as important for like a CRO or a VP of Ops who wants to align all of their sales managers to make sure that they're doing, like they're singing from a unified hymnal and like managing in the same way. And so the problem with like, so initially like we thought that there was this go-to-market metaphor here that we were going to like get behind, which like, oh yeah, it's like Datadog for like sales organizations, right? And like the sales motion is going to look like that, and it's like, yeah, it is Datadog for sales organizations, but there's really, especially in large organizations, you're not really going to have like an individual manager like doing his own thing or an individual manager doing her own thing. It's got to be aligned across the entire organization. And so and then that changed in a very meaningful fashion in the last like 6 months or so, where people who, managers who previously was like, oh yeah, you want to spend $6,000 on this? Like, go for it, man. Nowadays it's like, no, right? And so what we've had to do is like modify our go-to-market, and it's worked really well because recognizing that these organizations that have like 20, 30, 40 sales managers have this pain more and more than the smaller organizations has been important. And if we had not been open to that and instead just like kept banging our head against like, no, it's just Datadog, right? Like, or if you guys have been like, no, it's ExactTarget, it's exactly the same thing, just looks better, then you wouldn't have driven a similar outcome. I have a question on ExactTarget there, because I think that's actually really interesting, because in ExactTarget's case, this was also, it kind of feels like a similar situation, maybe a little bit. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, where there was marketing automation solutions or email sending platforms that were on-prem, right? Like the Epiphanies of the world or what have you. And of course, ExactTarget was like a cloudification of that, or Responses was the cloudification. Was it kind of like a similar situation where it's like the category kind of exists and the technology existed, but you had to talk to a different buyer because instead of talking to the CIO about like the on-prem thing they're going to rack, now you're talking to the line of business, or was it what were the learnings there for taking that to market?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the underlying technology that exists whenever these solutions are created obviously changes over time. As Mark Benioff stands up and says at every Dreamforce, we've gone from mainframe to client server to cloud, and he does that whole pitch. And like you said, on-prem email, and then ExactTarget in the cloud. And that's definitely one story, in that the underlying technologies are what makes a fundamental difference. And ultimately, what are these tools capable of, and what problem are they trying to solve, and how do they serve the modern customer? Like the technology is either an enabler or a limiting factor in that. And then you've got the solution itself, which is, what problem was this thing really built to solve? And ExactTarget is a really, really amazing email tool. It's an amazing email tool. But if I talk to my kids about interacting with brands with email, they'll be like, "What are you talking about? That's not how it's done. That's not how it's done if you're 17 years old." So the relationship between brands and their customers on the devices, with the channel and API options that are available now, is obviously so massive that brands have got to engage with people in a different way. And so in this particular case, this is really just a story of obsolescence. A lot of these tools are being created, and over time they just become obsolete because the world that they were created for no longer exists.
Changes.
Yeah, right, and that's where I got so lucky with Braze. Was, I joined a company with an amazing product that was ahead of its time at the right time, with some really, really great people and a high integrity go-to-market model. I mean, and that's the dream, right? You get on board that train, and off you go.
Yeah, and I think that having a tight feedback loop between go-to-market and product is really quite critical, because I think, and I'll like cop to this as a founder, like masquerading as a sales leader, right? Is like, and I think a lot of sales leaders, a lot of early stage sales leaders can probably identify with this, where the founder that potentially has like a product vision, like the product founder, what have you, that has a product vision that might be a little out of alignment with what the actual like market wants, right? And so in this case, oftentimes what can happen in like when a platform shift happens, and so in this case, it's like your how old are your kids?
20, 17, 16, 15.
Wow, nice. I have a 5-year-old. We were going toe to toe naming Pokemons back and forth this morning. Who would run out first, right? Like smartphones show up, and obviously SMS and like app push notifications, whatever, are important. And there were a lot of organizations that jumped out and were like, "Hey, we're gonna like do customer engagement orchestration for push notifications and SMS," thinking that was the only thing that they were going to do, versus considering the fact that like email is part of the customer journey, for old fogies like us, right? But also maybe a little bit for the your kids. They start with an SMS, and like maybe it drives them back to a richer UI within email. Maybe not, whatever. And I think that because AppBoy, if I recall correctly, started out with push notification orchestration, and then added email functionality later. Am I remembering that correctly, or
it didn't actually? No, it was always created as a channel agnostic piece of data architecture that could just and that was really the beauty of it, was that its architecture was literally designed for whatever channels the world comes up with. You know, maybe it's
SMS, push notification,
metaverse, whatever.
carrier pigeon, whatever.
Yeah, it really didn't matter. The app boy name to begin with put it somewhat in an app category, but it was
Right.
that's not what it was about. Yeah.
Got it. Which I think is really important, because you had a bunch of organizations that came out and were like, hey, we're going to be a great way of managing your push notifications. Yeah, I think it's like Urban Airship is an example of this, or SMS. Like a friend of mine started a company called Kahuna, which actually Matt Cameron, who you worked with at Salesforce, was at for a second. And I think you really kind of nailed it, which is thinking about what the customer needs, and then like aligning the functionality to that ends up being super important. And then we as go-to-market folks then, you know, reflect that to the market and help those folks understand that. So you could totally imagine being in a very powerful place to have a great discovery conversation around, you know, there's more channels that are constantly showing up that you as a marketer, or you as a, you know, an engineer, like a data architect that enables the marketing team, need to exploit. How are you thinking about making sure that you're agile such that when the next category of channels shows up, you don't have to throw away all the work that you've done? And of course, like, you know, their tongue falls out of their mouth and they're like, oh yeah, I just dealt with that. I've been like hacking this. And so then you're in a really great spot with Braze there. Oh, I want to change gears just a little bit, because you know, Dan is in. You're right outside of London, I want to say, if I'm recalling correctly. You're in London. Is that new? Because I feel that the last time we spoke, you might have been like a little bit outside. Oh, wonderful, or lovely, as the kids say these days. That's awesome. Okay, well, but regardless, whether you're like in London or right outside of London, you're definitely 8 hours ahead of California, and you're definitely, you know, 5 hours ahead of New York. And so I would love for us to talk a little bit about, like, one, kind of the implications of that for being like first boots on the ground in EMEA, because it's a very common behavior, you know, for organizations that are, you know, start in the United States, to, like, you know, put a pioneering sales leader into London. London's typically the spot. Like, one, how that works. And then two, what we'll do is, like, after that is we'll talk about the implications of that as, like, you know, when you're a remote leader, where like a lot of your organization is, I mean, not just all over the world, but definitely like 8 hours behind you, or like 5 hours behind you. But like, I think first, one of the things that the folks that are on the call here today would be really interested in is, like, you know, like, what does that first boots on the ground look like in EMEA, what have you? How do you manage that person? How do you contend with communication, all that sort of jazz?
Yeah. So there were a handful of customers, and some good customers in Europe when I arrived, January 2016.
Nice.
But it was very much setting up that region from scratch. You know, get a bank account, get an office, try and entice some people to join. And they're like, you know, why would someone join a company that doesn't have an office, doesn't have any amenities? Like, what is it that am I actually joining here, and what are we doing? And so I guess a couple of angles on that. One is, in terms of go to market, we very much lent on existing community. So there was an existing community of a handful of customers, or handful of people actually, that just thought very progressively about this sector. And we kind of figured that they might know each other. And so we started to do work to bring them together and get them to talk. And then, of course, they knew other people that they highly regarded in other businesses that were performing a similar role that weren't our clients. And so you start just to nurture these communities. So even though it was Europe, it wasn't really. It was like London, Berlin, Tel Aviv, these pockets of just really progressive people that understood what we were trying to do. And we just did a lot of work going into region, nurturing those local communities, just listening to these people. Then we sort of extended that by just generating awareness. So we would do a lot of in-region, in-city education, and we'd ask our existing communities to bring other people together so we can discuss and share this subject matter area. In terms of hiring people and everything like that, I mean, you do have to take some bets on folks that are not particularly experienced. I mean, you're building a business. This is net new. You know, you're not going to necessarily hire the A players. But one of the things that I did I definitely did right at the start there was I was true to the first follower principle. You know, when you go to a party and you stand up and dance and everyone thinks you're weird, and then somebody else stands up and dance and everyone's like, okay, it's not weird anymore.
It's a party.
The party now. And so I came over, and a very good friend of mine who was also at Salesforce at the time came over with me, and it went from Dan's joined a weird company to, oh no, this is something. And that made other people pay attention. And then all of a sudden we were able to get access to people, and certainly have discussions with people that probably wouldn't otherwise have entertained it. So I think it's really important to have that first follower that you can really start to build hiring momentum around. And then the next stuff is obviously culture. So the first cultural thing was, WeWork at the time was really great for us, because you want people that feel good about being in this new group of people, this new team that's solving this problem. And we happened to be in the biggest WeWork in London. It had a real buzz about it. You know, the young folks who were hiring loved coming to work there and hanging out. And you know, we would just spend all day together. We'd learn together. We'd talk about the challenges of building a business together. We really did it all together. And you can really see the benefit of when you have everybody together, listening to everybody's conversations, learning organically, you know, just that osmosis and that positive chemistry that happens when you've got a team of tight-knit group of people working together, which is so lost in this whole hybrid work thing, which I'm not a fan of at all. And so we've just really lent into that, and we got momentum very, very quickly, to the extent that several of the cultural factors that we established in London, we then started to export elsewhere. But it is weird to have a global CRO of a US-based company be based in the UK, but actually it wasn't so weird, because if you want to be global, you know, having global folks based in the US and the UK gives you good global coverage. It spreads that kind of epicenter of where decisions are made. But I would say either way, if you're building a global business and you've got a global role, it's going to be hard graft.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's one of those things that, like, early on, where like it may not yet be clear that you're going to be a global business. It might be like a lot to bite off. But later on, if you know that's the case, it's almost like a hygiene factor, where it's going to compel you to be good at, asynchronous communication and what have you. We have this really fantastic customer staff base that's based in EMEA. Actually started in EMEA, and I was talking to their head of sales operations the other day, and we were talking. She's based in Finland, and it was like 6 a.m. for me, but it was still like 6 p.m. for her, because I was like trying to accommodate. I didn't realize it was like 6 p.m. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry that, like, I'm keeping you after work. And she's like, oh no, I'm used to it. Like, we have people, like, my work day is like definitely like 12 hours, and then of course I have to like layer in pockets to, for like drop the kids off at school, and et cetera, et cetera. One thing I wanted to ask you about, though, there is, I very much agree with you that most early and mid-stage startups, a friend of mine had a great kind of phrasing on this on Twitter the other day, where it's like, immature, inexperienced businesses that typically hire, I don't want to say immature, but it's like inexperienced staff. And that's like one of the things that's so powerful about startups, is like the learning growth for like less experienced staff can be astronomical, but you're generally starting with folks who have high potential and maybe less of the specific acumen. And so making sure that you're training them up and doing that in a meaningful fashion is astronomically important. And doing that in a remote or distributed or kind of virtual environment ends up, it's much harder than like when you're sitting, like, I've got 6 AEs that I'm like looking at right now, and they're all like listening to each other right now, and they like lean over to each other and ask a question or what have you. And I think that I wonder to what extent people are like not appreciating kind of like what is lost when you don't have like 4 26-year-olds sitting next to each other. And I think oftentimes what ends up happening is people think like, oh, well, you think that they're like not actually like, like taking care of business or like working hard at home or whatever. It's like, it's less about that. It's more about just like intangible kind of like micro coaching and micro learning that like you just are stewing in all day long, which you're not when you're like your engagement and coaching behaviors are very chunked. One, I mean, it sounds like you kind of have a point of view on that. I'd love you to expand on it. And then two, I wonder if we can maybe talk about mechanisms by which to, contend with that for organizations that don't have the benefit of having, 10 people together in a WeWork or what have you.
Yeah. You're probably gonna have to cut me off because I could talk for hours about this subject, but
me too, man. I will. Okay, I'm gonna limit it to 5 minutes. I got my eye on the clock.
All right, 5 minutes. At the end of the day, it's like, what do we get paid for? We get paid to deliver results. So as I would say to my team, look, I don't care if you're on a boat in Antigua. If you're smashing your number, good for you. So are you smashing your number? Not really. All right. So if you're not smashing your ACV number, are you smashing your pipeline number? Not really. Okay. So then what about learning? Okay. You might be completing all the learning courses that you need to do at home because you've got a Lesson.ly subscription or whatever.
Yeah.
But are you learning from your colleagues? Are you collaborating? Sales is solving a puzzle. Are you getting together with your colleagues and putting the pieces together this puzzle and getting third, fourth, fifth opinions on it? Are you using networks? Are you listening to what everybody's saying? Maybe somebody in customer success knows somebody who knows your client, or they're in the same industry. Like, if you're not hitting your ACV numbers or your pipe numbers, you better be doing everything you possibly can to tool up to go do the job. And then if you're not doing that as well, then you're just not doing the job, and maybe your priorities lie elsewhere. And it's really as simple as that.
Okay.
Like I said, I think this is just about the outcome, and in sales, that is really, really clear to me. Whereas I think for non-sales folks, and this hybrid working thing, the engineering teams have been all over the news that whenever Apple or anyone says you got to come to the office, they're like, no, I don't think so.
Table, flip. Oh,
yeah, I think hybrid work. I think hybrid work most definitely has a place for anybody that every now and again just needs to get their head down and just do some work. It's like whatever environment suits you. Like if you're a painter, you're a coder, you probably just need a space. You can just be creative, and I totally get that. But it's really, really important that businesses don't fall foul to a contractor mentality, which is I'm doing my work. I'm doing what I'm asked to do. I'm delivering the outcomes. It's all about me, but you're getting from me what you want. And so don't make me do any more. It's like, hang on a second. We are a company. We are a group. We are a collective of people. And maybe you don't benefit from anybody else, but maybe other people would benefit from just seeing you walk up and down the corridors because you're an awesome engineer. They might want to talk to you. And that sort of idea of adding value to the professional lives of people around you is a very, very, very important attribute of a successful company.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really appreciate that thing that you're talking about there, which is the way that I kind of think about this is there's like information consumers, right? Like net information, like learners. And then there's kind of like information and expertise donors. And so that latter part there, that can be, a very important thing. Like that could be a senior AE or just like a tenured AE who knows a bunch of ins and outs and, great objection handles and like, oh, in that situation right there, you just want to do X, Y, Z and what have you. And I think that part right there is something that oftentimes is less appreciated, especially from a professional development standpoint for those folks, because that behavior that I'm describing right there is is a proto management behavior, right? It's like you're not actually like responsible for managing or coaching just yet, but you are engaging in coaching behaviors and micro coaching behaviors from the side, right? Like leading from the side. And when you have situations where that isn't like when those people don't have as much of an opportunity to do that information donorship, I don't even know if that's a word, then they're like not building that leadership muscle, right? So it's kind of one of those things where I think my hunch is that the like technology will catch up. And like, so as an example, our our SDR team uses a parallel dialing solution called Orem that actually has like a live like sales floor kind of functionality built into it. So like as a leader, you can kind of like sit in the middle of a bunch of like calls that are going on. I'm not doing a very good job describing it, but like it tries to approximate that behavior, such that you can like as a leader, you can be like, wait a minute, let's like lean over here, right? Like let's lean over here, versus saying like, okay, cool, it's Wednesday at 3, and this is when we have like our call coaching session, right? And it's like, okay, well, what about the other 40 hours in the week where we would have had like micro coaching sessions? My hope is that the technology catches up, but the thing that would really bum me out for organizations is to like pretend that like the not micro chunking, like the macro chunking, the chunking of interaction into like scheduled Zoom meetings is the same as like the micro interactions that folks have, because I think you're like probably like, you know, telling yourself a story there. Like I'll give you a very micro example that's like kind of ridiculous, but I'm going to do it anyway. So like I'm sure you're probably familiar of like with all the like crazy Silicon Valley Bank news that's been in the news and what have you. And so literally on like last Thursday, as we were contending, we used the bank with Silicon Valley Bank, but because my head of finance, my co-founder and I are all here in the same, my co-founder and I are in the same office, and like it wasn't one of those things where I was just like having to Slack him or like, hey, let's get on a call and like talk about this situation. Instead, it was just like, I'm gonna walk over to the desk, we're gonna like make a decision really quickly, and we're gonna like, you know, wire this money, and then we're not gonna be in a tough spot. And so I think that like if you think about the friction associated with like, is Daniel available right now? Is Dan available right now? Here, let me look on his calendar. Can I Slack him? Like all that sort of thing versus like literally just looking like this. That friction adds in a very meaningful fashion, and I think people just like don't appreciate it as much as
I
like
mean
how much it is.
Tight teams are competitive and they're fast, which is competitive.
Fast,
you know. And
right?
so if you've got like 10 people, 50 people, 100 people, if everyone's together, if every one of those people is like scheduling a call in the next 3 days, every time they want to talk to somebody or get any information, the whole thing is going to move so slowly. I mean, this was like, it's very old school, but like you say, walk over their desk or just pick up the phone, like just do it, you know. And the other thing that I think everybody, especially in sales, needs to understand is you do not have enough time. You do not have enough time. The fiscal year started, the sand time has turned over, the clock is ticking on your quote, and you don't have enough time. And so you need to get on with it. You need to get on with it quickly. And what I see, what I think is kind of ironic about this is that there is such a competitive advantage to be had from doing this effectively. It doesn't cost any money. You don't have to buy any tooling, but it's like if we are a tight, urgent team where people are available and knowledge is available and we are sharing and learning and problem solving together quickly. If everybody else out there is remote and hybrid and using tooling and scheduling Zooms in 3 days' time, your business is going to move like 5 times faster.
Yeah. I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier about like the natural progression of Braze up market. And I think one of the things you really kind of keyed off of there was that we found these folks who like really got it. And they got our unique selling proposition, which was this unique data architecture that was like channel agnostic, that was ready for new channels, et cetera, et cetera. And so those folks were at these high flying early stage companies, but then they went off to like Disney or I don't know, Coca-Cola or whoever else or whatever. And so I think what that kind of points to is the importance of one, customer success and delivering on the promise, because you can only really show up at their doorstep at Disney if they were like wildly successful at, I don't know, Tinder or like whatever, you know, whatever the kind of like high flying thing was. So I think it points to customer success, and then also like keeping track of those folks. Maybe you can kind of speak a little bit to like how Braze approaches to make sure that those folks were like wildly successful, and then how you guys kind of kept track of them afterwards as they went to these larger and larger ACV companies?
Yeah, so that's actually connected to the last point that we spoke about in terms of just tight-knit teams. So one of the things that we did fairly early on at Braze was we originally had folks that were net new salespeople and they looked after existing customers.
Yep.
And at the time, we as a business, we weren't that good at net new selling. We weren't that good at managing existing customers. So we said, like, let's just split that and have net new salespeople and account managers looking after the base. And what we did was the account managers went and sat in the office next to the customer success managers. You know, so you've got the people that are responsible for adoption in customer success sitting next to those people that are responsible for renewals and commercial growth in those accounts. And that meant that we were literally, those folks were tracking where the opportunities were, where the people were, where they were moving to, what was going on. And like, customer success is just, that's like the beating heart of your base. You know, what's going on, who's there, who's leaving, who's unhappy, whatever. And that information needs to get straight into the people that need to deal with it from a commercial leadership perspective. And so literally just sitting the people next to them literally solves that problem. Now, if you're working in a hybrid manner, you don't get any of that. That doesn't work. You can't have weekly meetings to solve it. It just doesn't work. Now, eventually the business did shift back into a, you know, just you sell the account and you own it, when we were more mature and we developed those competencies. But at some point, the business has got to learn the value of just getting the knowledge from the point where it resides. You know, and that was by far and away the most effective way we solved for that.
Yeah. Well, so we're, I think, in a situation where it's funny, like, we need a name for like a thing that actually is a new category that doesn't look like a new category, but actually is a new category. Because that's what, because it requires people to think in a new way, which is what you're talking about, right? Like, hey, new data architecture, channel agnostic, et cetera, et cetera. So then when, this is like the joke I always talk about with Atrium, is like, we have to, like, we're in the like we're in the conversion business, not conversion like landing pages. You know, we're in the advocacy business, and we're missionaries on this mission of like, hey, look, like, you should manage it, like sales organizations should manage by metric. You know, individual managers should be managing by metric. They shouldn't be managing by deal. They should like only managing by deal. And so then when you find the people who like really get the religion, now you got to like hold on to them, right? And so like one mechanism by which to do that, of course, is to make sure the CS, you know, CS and AM or CS and AE are like sharing a brain. But I think there are kind of new technologies that facilitate this. Like, so for instance, we're a customer of a company called User Gems, that allows you to kind of keep track of like where your users go. So as an example, we have all of our users modeled as contact objects in Salesforce. And then we use a technology called Census to send data from our cloud data warehouse. We use Redshift because we don't have like massive data. Send like usage data onto the contact object. So what we have is on every single contact object, we probably have like a couple dozen fields that indicate to us like, you know, levels of utility and usage and what have you. So, and you can totally see it. Like, you see the people who get it, right? They're like in Atrium, you know, 15 days out of the trailing 30, they have like a bajillion page views. They've created a bunch of like their own like saved cards and reports and what have you. And then we just have a ticker. We do a couple of things. We have a ticker that just counts up their total page views over time. It's actually like a really good heuristic for like how stoked someone is. And then that just like lives on the contact object. And then the other thing we do is we do an intensity thing. So like the first time that somebody has been in the tool, 10 days in the trailing 30, that actually just flips from a Salesforce automation. It flips a bit and stamps a field as to the first time there. And we call that being a sales scientist. And so at that point, like we know that person is juiced and they're converted. And so we do a bunch of stuff from a customer success standpoint. Like we send them a prize, like a little sales scientist mug and a bunch of other stuff as well. But then we have this other technology that tracks those people. So if somebody departs the organization and they land as a VP of sales ops over here, we go and we grab them and say, hi, how's it going? Can we send you a bottle of champagne? Wonderful. And so, this is an example of trying to facilitate and automate and like technologize what has historically been something that you would want to do more verbally. And I think that in general, like technology will kind of help facilitate that. The other way that we use that information as well is, when new people of a certain title show up into an account, right? So a good example of that, like, say we have a very large account that's got like, 30 managers using Atrium to manage or whatever. And then, we've been historically liaised with the senior director of sales operations, and then all of a sudden they hire a VP of sales operations. Well, it's probably pretty important that we like, show up and say hi and like get to know them and what have you. And so these are all behaviors that can be automated, not like doesn't then just like do the action, but it informs the people to then take action associated with that. So those are some kind of helpful things there. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the stuff that you're working on right now, Dan. I think you said that you're doing some advisory work with some companies. Is that primarily like, like what size of sales organizations are these that you're working with?
They are all new, so they're all seed or Series A.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow.
And so one of them, which is the one I can talk about, which is Kuvama, is a seed round business, very small sales team, and it came up through connections I've got in the investor industry, and I was just particularly intrigued by the value proposition, which is all about helping sales teams in SaaS companies to not only value sell, but to actually go through the process of discovery properly, so that you are more effective at value selling. So there are lots of tools out there that exist to kind of do ROI calcs. The problem is that the buyers don't believe or trust the ROI calc. They're like, that just suits you, the seller.
Marketing math.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is much more about, but like, you go into any business, talk to any sales leader, and you say, what stage do you lose deals at? And they'll be like, discovery. It's like, okay, well then let's solve that problem, right? And so it exists to solve that problem. And what I think is really interesting is and I'm sure every sales leader would agree with this, like the problem with learning and development is that even if people do it, they forget it. Yeah. And the problem with tools that support discovery, like discovery guides and so on, the problem with those is that, in my experience, salespeople spend more time reinventing those tools and tailoring those tools than actually using those tools effectively. Yeah. And the problem with sales leadership oversight is that it's really difficult to scale. And so very few managers are really, really good coaches. And even those that can't scale. So if they do it, they can't scale it, or they're not doing it and not scaling it. And so what Kuvama is all about is how can we provide more active enablement at the point of client engagement for discovery? How can we make the discovery guides more uniform and useful at that point of client engagement? And how can we, in effect, be like an active coach during the process of discovery, because maybe the sales leader can't be in all those discovery calls? And then ultimately that leads to more effective value selling. So that's their proposition for their SaaS clients. I think it's a really fascinating problem to solve. I mean, you read every sales book that exists, and pretty much everybody that's written a sales book has violent agreement on this subject of discovery. But there's lots of enablement on it, but there's very little tooling to actually support it. So I'm really enjoying that piece of work. And like I said at the start of the call, it's teaching me a lot about the difference between being an advisor and an operating lead.
Well, and also it's just like, I mean, it's very early stage companies, the behaviors are very different as well, right? So, because I think when you joined Braze, you said it was a few hundred people, I want to say.
100.
100, yeah, 100. And so, early on, when you're creating the sales motion versus refining the sales motion, right? The metaphor I like to use is, you're creating the recipe, right, for reliably baking the cake, or you're building the map for like the map for the journey through the forest, versus refining it. It can be it's a much different situation where the customers may not get it whatsoever. The product may not get it, right? The product may not fit the market, et cetera. So the iteration loops end up being extraordinarily important there. Are they based? Where are they based?
They're based in London.
Perfect. So I was just going to say, probably a great example of like needing to have like tight iteration loops and like good rich communication. So you guys go into a WeWork and hang out? Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. And what I think is really interesting about that is because it's a bit like we were saying earlier about the value proposition, is that we're spending a lot of time talking about like what actually is this and how do we articulate it, know, and because it's in one respect it's nothing new, and in another respect it really is. It's another way of trying to solve a problem that most companies don't do a great job of. I mean, no one needs to worry about great salespeople, but in every sales company there's probably like 1 or 2% of the salespeople that carry the whole company. And you don't need to worry about those. The only thing you need to worry about those people is that they're going to leave. So you better not ignore them, And the mistake sales managers make is they spend all their time with the low performers and not enough time with the high performers. So the high performers need to be loved, but this is really all about improving the performance of average reps. Obviously there are some whose lives maybe shouldn't be in sales and they need to be helped to find wherever their future is. But that average cohort, you can improve that performance by like 10 to 20%. That's massive for a business, and do that in a scalable way. And so, but we do a lot of talking, like I said, about what actually is this? What is the category? How are we going to message it? And my experience at Braze is that takes a long time to figure out, but it's necessary.
Yep. Elliot, hello. Have you come to kick us out?
I have. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap things up now.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Stop talking about remote work, guys.
Please, no. No, of course. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap things up now. Want to thank everyone for attending. Big thank you to our sponsor of today's event, Atrium. Make sure to check them out. I'm actually gonna redrop the links in the chat, so make sure to click through those, everyone. Big thank you to Pete and Dan for providing the content. Recordings and key takeaways from this event are going to be available on our page shortly. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.
Cool.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Bye-bye.